Good afternoon and welcome to this construction section CLE on the standard of care in construction cases. I'm Andrew Byrne. I am the chair of the construction section. And this is our annual meeting where we do our elections for next year's officers. Don't see those who've been nominated here yet, so I think we'll reserve that election till the end. So we'll just jump right into the presentation. Today we're going to hear from Mike Velez, and I actually met Mike. He sent me this book, On Time and Under Budget. He's an expert witness who's spent about 40 years in the construction industry and transitioned from being a contractor to using his experience as an expert, and now does that on a full-time basis. I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more, but as he and I talked, he's got plenty of experience to pull from to discuss his thoughts on how we as attorneys can help streamline the process and help establish the standard of care in our cases. So with that, I'll give the time over to Mike, and then we'll do our elections at the end of the hour. So
thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much, Andrew. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with all of you today, and very honored to do so. As Andrew said, I'll start out with a brief introduction. I have an MBA from the University of Utah, 1983, 1975 graduate of Michigan Technological University in civil engineering. I am a registered professional engineer in Utah. As I gained my necessary years experience in engineering, I was living in Utah, and so that's why my registration is here, and I never really bothered to go anywhere else. I have spent my entire career in construction, 40 years. I'm highlighting some of the industrial projects here that I've been involved with. Starting out in 1977, I moved to Utah as a project engineer for the underground copper mine being built in Tooele Canyon, Pine Canyon in Tooele by Anaconda Mining Company. It was a 4,000 ton per day underground copper mine, which started operation and shortly closed down because of copper prices. Then I went to work for Kennecott on a similar project, and these are some of the industrial projects that I've worked on over my career. More recently, I've built a geothermal power plant on the Big Island of Hawaii for Rocky Mountain Power. I did some large upgrades of their environmental systems to clean the particulates out of the coal-fired emissions, and was a project manager for on a rare earth mine in Mountain Pass, California, just south of Las Vegas. And that's a rare earth mine, and I was the project manager for the power plant on that one. On the commercial side, I started out in the early 1980s. I moved over to commercial construction, and I first built the Duke Power headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina, with a company called McDivitt & Street Company. And after building that project successfully, I was put on the construction of the James Center in downtown Richmond. Was a whole city block in the middle there. It was an entire city block development with 3 high-rise office towers and a high-rise hotel and 4 levels of below-grade parking. My hometown, Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, moved back and was a project manager on the Xcel Energy hockey arena in St. Paul. Also, further went on in a couple of years, was involved in working for an Indian tribe on a contract to build an Indian school on a reservation in South Dakota. And then another project was called the Ted Mann Concert Hall in the University of Minnesota campus. These are just a select group of this. And then I spent several years developing multifamily projects, apartments and condominiums, shown in these photographs. So the genesis of my thoughts on leadership is contained in this presentation in On Time and Under Budget. Really started in 1982 when I was working on my MBA at the University of Utah. And I had an advisor who recommended that I look into the subject of goal setting, because a lot of work had been done on motivation and goal setting. And at the time, the Business Roundtable had just completed a multi-year study on construction effectiveness in the construction industry called the CICEP, the Construction Industry Cost Effectiveness Project. That work was published in 1982. And one of the things they said in that report, which stuck with me for many years, it says, innovation in the concepts of goal setting could be very rewarding in construction. And so I took that and studied goal setting extensively in my MBA studies, did my master's project on goal setting in construction, and those lessons learned, I've applied over my entire career and have been very helpful in success I've been able to achieve and enjoyment that I've received out of the industry. So from 1983 to 2017, I applied these principles on managing construction projects across the country. And in 2014, I published On Time and Under Budget to sort of synthesize everything that I had learned about leadership and getting things done on time and under budget, which is sometimes, as lawyers, you might consider that an anomaly. So in 2017, I started working on expert witness consulting, and I was working as a sub-consultant to a company called Long International out of Denver, Colorado. Long International is probably one of the top 2 or 3 claims consultants worldwide. They do projects all over the world, and I was very fortunate to make a shift and get established with Long International. I was quickly asked to be on the board of directors and become a shareholder of that firm, and worked on some very interesting projects. Common issues that I ran into were geotechnical, structural, bidding errors, process management, fabrication errors, and emerging issues that originally had a lot of concern with COVID delays. I haven't worked on that particular issue yet. The contents of this presentation, the intent is to present some proven leadership and management principles which can be applied to the leadership of a construction legal case and show how they can be applied to achieve a high level of efficiency and effectiveness. And I draw a distinction between efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency is the state or quality of being efficient. Effectiveness is the degree to which something is successful in producing a desired result. And, the number of hours spent on a case is not necessarily correlated with effectiveness, as I'm sure we all know. And so what is the state of construction industry today? 9 out of 10 projects experience cost overruns. In 3 years studied, only 31% of all projects came within 10% of their budget. Large projects take 20% longer to finish than expected and are up to 80% over budget. So I'll tell you, towards the end of my construction career, I did a stint with Rio Tinto, Kennecott on a large project. And at the time, as part of the Rio Tinto projects group, they analyzed projects across their portfolio around the world, and the average cost overrun was over 70%. Poor communication is the root cause of project failure 1/3 of the time. 35% of construction professionals' time is spent on non-productive activities. Productivity changes could save the industry $1.63 trillion per year. More than 4 out of 5 mining projects come in late and over budget by an average of 43%. 98% of mining mega projects suffer cost overruns of more than 30%. And as I mentioned, I don't think I'm speaking out of school. Rio Tinto had project records of over 70% on many of their projects. One of the principles that I've applied in construction and in my expert witness consulting work. By the way, I live in Cottonwood Heights, Utah. I didn't mention that. So I'm a local guy. One of the principles that has guided me really throughout my professional life and whatever I have done has been the Pareto principle. And I'm going to state that simply by saying that 20% of our efforts can often produce 80% of our results. Now, there are 5 to 10 different ways to state the Pareto principle about customers. You could say that 20% of your customers provide 80% of your revenues or sales. There are a lot of different ways to look at the Pareto principle, but in terms of managing our work as consultants and managing cases for clients in construction litigations. I think that this has been a guiding principle for me in the last 6 years in doing my expert work, and it's been pretty effective. I want to share some examples of how that actually has come into play and been applied on some cases. So this was actually my first expert witness case was an $850 million claim by an owner against an EPC contractor on construction and design and construction of an iron ore mill. And I had an associate do the schedule analysis work on this project with me. I did basically the standard of care work and the program analysis on the project, which was the bulk of this project ended up in that area. And, you know, this is a photograph from my library at home. So I have a big library, construction management references, and also with a particular interest on structural, geotechnical, and safety. So in this particular project, I heavily referred on several references. This one here, Industrial Mega Projects, this book here, Edward Merrow, he's got a company called IPA, Independent Project Analysis. And he's analyzed over 1,000 projects and put them through a rigorous analysis to find out on an industrial project, which are different than commercial projects, obviously, but on an industrial project, what are the things that cause these projects to go overrun and actually to over budget and over schedule? They've actually been able to quantify the root causes, the various root causes of these cost and schedule overruns, basically doing a root cause analysis with a very rigorous statistical analysis. And so I used a lot of that work in this particular case. And one of the associates, Edward Merrill, is a guy by the name of Mr. Barshop. And he came up with 12 rules for effectively managing an industrial project from design, from concept through design, through construction, and come up with this what's called, and it's commonly used in the industry, front-end loading. So, you know, in commercial construction, which I'm sure you all are pretty familiar with, we have different stages during design. You have schematic design, design development, working drawings, and these are the phases of architecture that are involved in preparing a set of plans for bidding or construction. In industrial, we have what's called FEL 1, FEL 2, and FEL 3. And rule number 1 is follow the stage gate process. And this particular owner did not follow the stage gate process. That was one of the root causes of the project going overrun. So in my expert work, I was representing the EPC contractor that was being sued for $850 million for all these cost and schedule overruns. But we were able to analyze the project, tie the root cause of these cost and schedule overruns back to the owner's actions and decisions, and create a viable defense. So, and basically what we did was we focused on Barshop's rules one by one, going through the documents, validating, researching whether these rules had been followed, where they've been violated. And also this analysis helped us provide deposition support for the attorneys to ask questions during the deposition stage and provide additional validation for our arguments. As I mentioned, in the architectural design process, we have pre-design, schematic design, design development, construction documents, construction administration. Now, how does this apply? And one of the reasons I have this in here is because in my expert work to date, as an expert, we work hard to be very responsive And as you know, the workflow can come and go in stages. There can be periods of intense work and then pauses, and then periods of intense work again and pauses again. And so it requires a lot of flexibility on the part of the expert. But one of the things that I think would be really helpful, and I've seen diagrams like this for litigations, which are much more complex, but I think in working with your experts, I would recommend and suggest that having a session, a planning session at the beginning of the engagement with an expert, that there be some effort to lay out this workflow plan, because what we've seen in architecture and industrial work, having a planned workflow and having people operate on a common consensus about how that's going to occur has been very effective in achieving efficiency and effectiveness. And I think that's, I guess, the kernel that I can take out of, you know, my experience on the construction side and apply to this conversation here today. So in doing so, number one, we'd like to identify the key issues in the case. And this is in applying the Pareto principle again, prioritizing the issues. Prioritization will form the team of the approach to these analytic elements of scope, post, cost, and time and quality. So standard of care, delay analysis, windows analysis, and then quantum, you know, all get back to this project management triangle that we learn about, you know, in our construction management classes. So again, the Pareto principle, I'm going to talk about a couple of cases where we applied the Pareto principle. I applied the Pareto principle and was able to serve our client as an expert witness. So this case was, and I say, don't make promises you can't keep. And this was, I'm not talking about as an expert, but as a contractor. Here's a case where a contractor made some promises he couldn't keep. I need a sip of water here. So this was on a 1,200-mile long high voltage transmission line. On which the contractor claimed a $200 million loss for a mild winter. Now, that sounds kind of odd. It was a mild winter, so you had a claim. Let's dive into that. It's kind of interesting. I hope you find it. So one of the things, and this was an interesting thing too. All my years in construction and expert work, this was the first and only time I ever saw an owner do what they did here. And I thought it was a brilliant contracting strategy. During the negotiations with the 2 or 3 bidders, the owner engaged the contract. It was a competitive, what they call a competitive negotiation process that was put in place. And during that process, they were able to enter into conversations with the contractors about risk management. And what they asked each contractor to do was identify the key risks that the contractor saw they might encounter during the execution of the project. And then, after identifying those risks, identifying what the risk mitigation plan would, how was the contractor going to mitigate those risks in their execution of the project in order to, you know, avoid the impact of those risks. And so this risk mitigation plan was a 20-page document. It had all the charts and graphs and all the analysis of the different risks. And then this became the mitigation plans developed by the contractor became a contract obligation. And I thought this was really an interesting way to onboard a contractor in a way that protects the owner and gets everybody on a working plane early on before the project ever starts to identify the risk and how project's going to be executed. And I say, don't make promises you can't keep, because in this case, the contractor made some promises that they didn't keep. So the number one risk, yeah, go ahead.
That being the RFP process.
That was part of the RFP process.
So
Yeah.
you're getting all risk management plans from all these different
Yes,
contractors.
and then they narrowed it down, and then there was a competitive negotiation that occurred that involved three of the contractors really diving deep into this risk management process. So the number one risk was a very unique situation. Inadequate or limited access to right-of-way during shortened winter season or heavy snowfall. Now, why is that? So the mitigation plan that the contractor had was to quote unquote pound frost. That's a term I'd never heard of before, but this was project was conducted across a region of tundra. Okay, so I'm going to scroll by that a little bit. Well, to the extent it was practical, here's what it said in the contract. Taking in the risk management plan, to the extent which is practicable, taking into account cost and time, the contractor shall be deemed to have obtained all necessary information as to the risk, contingencies, and other circumstances which may influence or affect the work as of the base date. And to the same extent, the contractor shall be deemed to have visually inspected and examined the site, its surroundings, the above data, and other available information in respect to site preparation work, which has been performed by others, and to have been satisfied as to the base date as to all relevant matters, including temperatures and or snowfall depths that could delay the penetration of frost into the soil. Now, in examining the documents and doing my forensics of the project, I came across this and I realized when I was a senior in college up in Michigan Tech, up in northern Michigan, has about as much snowfall as Alta, Utah in the winter. And a couple of my crazy friends and I went out and we did some winter camping. And I realized when we went out there, we had to dig down through the snow to get to the ground to pitch our tent. And I remember the discovery that under the snow, the ground was not frozen. And so that was the first time that had occurred to me. And the snow actually, insulates the ground. So this was one of the risks that this contractor had working in a northern climate. And interestingly, I found a research report that the Polish military had done on frost depth versus ambient temperature. So there was a correlation. You could take weather data and calculate what the theoretical depth of the frost was in the ground. So, and I understand the U.S. Army has also done similar studies. And if you've tracked what's happening in Ukraine, you might have heard that the winter offensives or, the tempo of the Ukraine war has been affected by the ground not freezing. They had a mild winter and military equipment, would sink in the ground. So it deferred a lot of the military activity over there. Well, by taking this information, we're able to see how this one issue and the contractor's failure to pound frost, as shown in this photograph on the right, their failure to do that until it was too late caused about a 15-day. If they had pounded frost, according to their plan, it was a mild winter, but if they had pounded frost, they would have only lost 15 days on the schedule. We took that information, analyzed it with the CPM analysis, and determined that had they pounded frost, they would have still had time to complete the project on time and in a cost-effective manner, but they didn't. And so this was a fatal flaw. And again, the only reason I bring this up is this was a huge case, $200 million, and there were probably 10 or 15 issues that we could have focused on, and we touched on them. But this one issue it's the 80-20 rule again. You find out what are the key points to really dig deep on. And, I think this ended up being about a 250-page report with several hundred exhibits, but the key issue was this frost issue that we were able to argue successfully. Suspension bridge reconstruction, there was a $15 million delay claim by the owner against the contractor. And in all of that analysis, we found that there was an element to this project that was to be design build, and that's a traveler that travels underneath the bridge deck. And this was to be a design build element by the contractor. And however, the engineer for the bridge authority required the contractor to make 24 different submittals and resubmittals, and far beyond what a design build role should have been. So on a design build, the owner, as you know, is basically giving over a lot of the design decisions to the contractor, with certain limits, of course, as you know. But in this case, the owner's engineer far overstepped their role as a design reviewer. And again, we dug deep into this particular issue, and that explained the majority of the time delays that occurred on this bridge project. So team motivation, and I talked about goal setting at the beginning, and goal setting is such a proven concept that I think it behooves everybody in any setting that has to achieve anything, understand goal setting. And number one is the steps in goal setting. One is define the task, set the goal, obtain goal commitment, measure performance, and provide feedback. And it sounds very simple, but sometimes it really helps to keep these steps in the front of our mind when we're conducting any activity, whether it's executing, legal case or building a project. Another case where the Pareto principle was applied, the $55 million contractor claim against an owner for alleged change conditions. And this was on a hydro dam, and the contractor claimed that the rock that it encountered in the quarry. So this project involved quarrying rock, blasting it, transporting it into the dam, the core of the dam, and rolling it and placing it. And this was the contractor's major argument. But I found that the quarry, the characteristics of the quarry were properly defined in the bid documents. The geotechnical documents were correct. The contractor did not understand rock blasting when it prepared its bids. And I just happened to have rock blasting experience with my mining background. And so I understand the mechanics and science of rock blasting, and so was able to apply that here. Contractor was unable to mobilize additional drilling and blasting equipment crews in timely manner to meet the schedule. So they were attempting to lay large, oversized blocks from the quarry into a rock-filled dam, where the specified size, as you can see here, these were the specified sizes. This was the original size specified, and then through relaxation of the spec, they came to here, but the contractor was attempting to place pieces this big. And so it definitely held them up. Another case of the, again, Pareto principle, 52-story high rise. This case is actually going on. I'm involved in this case now. The floors in this 52-story high rise hotel deflected up to 3.5 inches, if you can imagine. These are cast in place concrete floors. And I've never seen, deflections like that in my entire career. And so it was actually, questioning whether or not the building was going to be able to stay standing. And it did. It was thoroughly inspected by structural engineers. So not in Utah, but so the root cause was that the general contractor had hired an inexperienced concrete contractor who had previously only done a 4-story building. It was the highest building they had ever built. And so now they're involved in building a 52-story high rise. And if you know anything about concrete construction in high rises, you have to do what's called reshoring. And in a high rise, and I've done a lot of this work, you have to when you have initial shoring, which is a, forming system on which you place your reinforcing bar or post-tension strands. And then you must, as the building progresses upward, you need to reshore below that top level to the extent that you have a full, 28-day or 30-day nominally curing period on that concrete, because concrete, as you know, doesn't reach its full strength until nominally 28 days is considered full strength in most cases. So this contractor had not properly done the reshoring, so the floor sagged. And so again, back to the 80-20 rule, there were a lot of other issues, but I'm diving deep into this one, and I think that's the approach we're going to take. Obviously, I don't mention the names of these cases, but for obvious reasons. Another project that I'm involved with is a $42 billion LNG plant in Tanzania, Africa. This project's being built by ExxonMobil, Shell, and Equinor, and this is a little bit off my normal kind of thing, but I've been involved in Tanzania on some nonprofit work since 2005, and about a year ago, actually it was last April, I read about this big project that ExxonMobil, Shell, and Equinor are planning to build on the coast of Tanzania. And we had the Nord Stream pipeline blown up from Russia, and so we have a lot of geopolitical issues going on, and in the LNG industry. And so this project has been in the planning for many years, and these companies have already spent over $3 billion just defining the resource and doing feasibility work. And so they're just getting into the early design, detailed design phases. So that's going to be a 4 or 5 year effort just to develop the plans so that construction can start. But if you look at one of the big risks on a project like this is the lack of skilled labor. This project is going to take 20,000 workers and skilled workers, and there's not a single certified welder in the Swahili speaking world. I mean, I can say that with authority with the investigation I've done. And I've visited half a dozen welding schools in Tanzania. We've inventoried the equipment. We've interviewed over 50 welding instructors there, and met with the Minister of Education, Adolf Mkenda, on the left there. And then our goal is to train 5,000 certified trades. And this is GFP International is a nonprofit that I founded. And so just last week, these 4 men who are welding instructors met with Dr. Noel Bonde, who's the Director of Technical Education for the country of Tanzania, to give them a send-off. And they're going to be starting their training in Salt Lake Community College here in September. So I hope I don't divert from the main topic of the talk a little bit, but it gets into risk management. And, on a big major project like this, for a company like ExxonMobil or Shell Oil, lack of skilled labor in the coming resource boom in Africa is a big risk. And I identify that as someone from the industry, and just felt like there was an opportunity there to make a difference with that. So we're doing that as a nonprofit entity. So we're almost 40 minutes, not quite an hour. So we're going to have plenty of time for questions. But so as a leader, there's certain things that I might suggest, and one is pursue self-mastery, and that could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's continuing education like we're doing today, continue reading, have a curious mind, pursue, enjoyment of the outdoors, spiritual activity, whatever self-mastery might mean to you, and have impeccable integrity. I had I only had one case in 6 years where I had an attorney kind of wanted me to write something in a report that I couldn't support with facts. And well, I don't want to go into that too deeply, but I felt that that was a risky thing to do. I mean, as an expert, I would never want to be in a position of completely debasing my credibility by putting something that I couldn't support with facts or that I knew was not true. And, you know, that's putting my client at risk and putting my professional reputation at risk. And I would never want to be in that position or put my clients in that position. So I think as a leader, I think integrity is a big issue. And the third is pursue client service and satisfaction as an ultimate purpose. You know, I had a on a personal note, I have a health plan that sent a doctor over to my house yesterday for like a 1 hour review of my health. And he had a lot of questions about, do you feel depressed? Do you feel like you don't have any purpose in your life? You know, you ever feel like it's just not worth getting up in the morning, or, you know, things like that. And I realized, you know, we've seen a huge uptick of suicides in the last couple of years. And I think that having a sense of client service and embracing that as a personal mission can give us meaning, and if nothing else. And so that's kind of the way I approach things. So what are the key principles in this talk? Standard of care, commitment to planning. You know, I think that we can chart out how a case is going to go with our teams, if that's possible. Maybe it's going to take 2 or 3 different possible routes. Sometimes we don't know when a case begins, how it's going to go. Open communication, goal setting. The Pareto principle, really, I can't say enough about that. It's been something that I've applied, I mean, on a daily basis. And when I was in a construction career, you know, I'd start out with a list of things to do that day. And, you know, it might have 15 or 20 things of urgent things that had to happen that day. And one of the exercises I did every morning was I gave it an A, B, or a C priority. And, you know, I worked through the A's, and by 11 o'clock, I had a whole new list. I mean, that's how construction goes. And so by doing that kind of thing, you know, that's one element, that's one aspect of the Pareto principle. But I try to apply that in my expert work as well, and in case work that I'm fortunate to get involved with. And so I guess I'm a little bit early, and so we have time for comments or questions.
Yeah, so Mike, on these cases where you found that those key issues and you were able to use this Pareto principle, how did you accomplish that? Was it working with, did the attorneys present to you, okay, well, this is what we think the key issues are, or were you just going through the documents looking for those key issues? How did you get to that 80-20?
Well, I think it varies. I mean, let's talk the high-rise case. The lawyers came right up front and said, you know, they hired this independent contractor, and, you know, they've had 3.5-inch sag on the floors. And I mean, once you know those 2 facts, it's pretty obvious they had a problem with reshoring. They didn't, because an independent structural engineer looked at the design. You know, one of the arguments a contractor might have was that the structural design was faulty. And so the owner's lawyer hired an independent structural engineer practicing structural engineering in the state where the project occurred. And they were able to prove the validity of the structural design. So then it was obviously a construction problem. So, you know, in that case, in the iron ore mine case, the $850 million case, the lawyer really didn't have an idea of how to defend against this claim and we were representing the EPC contractor again. The owner really didn't have an idea about how to defend against this claim, because the facts are the thing ran over, and it cost, you know, ran over schedule and over budget. And so digging into the details of why that happened, and that was grunt work. I mean, that was just a lot of grunt work. And knowing, really relying on the work of Edward Merrow and mega projects studies that he's done. It's the most thorough piece of work in that area that anybody's ever done, and it's really become a really important piece of work. Talked about the dam. I mean, we knew that the contractor was having a problem, with the size of the boulders coming out of the quarry, and so then it was a matter of doing the rock mechanics analysis, material handling analysis, and piecing that all together. So it depends. Sometimes the lawyer kind of knows and it's pretty obvious right up front. Other times on the power line, the lawyer really didn't have a strategy. In fact, the lawyer really didn't. I was really surprised. The lawyer was really hands off. But by the time we got finished, we were able to present this thing about the frost depth and the curves and all that. He was like, wow, and so it really depends on the case.
So as a follow-up, what are you looking from the lawyers to help achieve that efficiency and effectiveness?
Well, so I had a case where a lawyer had a 2-page list of all the issues. It was about 15 issues, and I asked him, I said, well, what do you think is the most important? He said, all of them. And, I said, well, they can't all be that important, and I mean, we could be here 2 years doing a study on these, but finally we narrowed it down and we had a conversation, but his synopsis was, well, what were the root cause and what were the effects? What were the cause and effects of, what happened on the project, what he really wanted. And so we're spending time on that, but yeah, I mean, there's always an outline of, there's always an understanding by my clients, lawyers about the case, and we certainly download as much as we can from them on initiation of an assignment. Yeah.
All right, I'm checking online to see if there's questions online. You might be able to see from your computer as well, but my question has to deal with we only had one expert that wanted to get involved at a very early stage of the case. And it was important for interrogatories, like you mentioned, and requests for documents to know exactly what that expert, rather than coming in towards, the end of fact discovery and saying, hey, this is what we got for you, expert. Let's see what you can do with it. What are some of the pros and cons, I guess, with having an expert come in really early on?
Well, really early on is probably relative, so it's hard for me to, understand when you say really early on, what stage are you?
Just at the beginning, like filing the complaint.
Oh, yeah. I don't really have a big, strong opinion about that. I will say that in 2 of the cases that I spoke of here today, we were early enough to help provide deposition support by suggesting questions of specific individuals. And those questions were targeted and designed and derived from our examination of emails and documents and other communications, facts from the case that we could, as attorneys, you can take an email, it might mean something, but then getting the witness to admit to something or whatever, in deposition is another level of strength. So yeah, I think in the cases where I've been able to provide deposition support, it's been pretty effective.
I should clarify that I only had one expert insist that they be involved at the very beginning.
Oh,
But I've learned that it's just better to keep them involved at the beginning. clients don't like paying for experts because they always think they're gonna settle. So, you know, there's that angle. Have you seen that in your practice? Clients say, well, I don't want to bring an expert in right yet.
You know, by the time I get involved, you know, the last 6 years, the principals of the firm I've been working with have already, you know, it's already on, the client's already on board and, you know, I shouldn't say that. I was involved in a lot of the, I was presented as the expert in a lot of cases that we were awarded. And so I was involved at that stage as well. But typically, yeah, it was before a case was filed. It wasn't before a case. Cases had already been filed and initial claims and counterclaims, you know, had been traded. Yeah, typically. Yes.
I was curious, you mentioned the lack of certification of skilled workers in Africa.
Yeah.
Was it the case that there just wasn't a certification process, or that there really weren't enough workers to do what they were doing?
Well, so this is interesting. Again, I'm not talking about a case that has occurred, but this is a independent project that I'm involved in.
Yeah.
You know, personally and professionally. These big companies, ExxonMobil, Shell, they all operate in silos. You know, they have this group and that group, and no, you know, even though nobody's too worried about the workforce. You know, they're all thinking that the engineering construction contractor is going to worry about that. But the engineering contractor doesn't get involved till the end, you know, to the end of the beginning of the construction, the end of all the planning. And by that time, it's too late to do training. So it takes a year to develop a certified welder. And so we have 4 coming over to Salt Lake Community Center. Those 4 will be able to each train 20. We'll each be able to train 20. And by 2027, when they're needed on the project, we'll be able to deliver 5,000 certified welders.
So are you saying that the level of skill in these African countries is not sufficient for the project?
Well, I can speak to, let me speak to welding in particular, because that's probably one of the more difficult. They teach ornamental welding in most of Africa. South Africa has certified welders. In fact, one of my colleagues is a contractor from South Africa, and he does tanks and piping on industrial projects with his South African, he's a South African himself, with his South African workers. He does work over the southern horn of Africa. And so South Africa has certified welders, but in the rest of Africa, an ornamental welder can do bed frames, window frames, you know, gates and doors and things like that. But in terms of doing a certified pipe weld for an industrial plant, or a structural weld, you know, that meets ASTM and AACE, you know, all the AWS standards, they don't teach that. And part of the reason is, so the Tanzanian training is 80% theory, 20% practice. Here in the US, it's 80% practice, 20% theory, 80% skill development, so that welder can do a certified weld. And they need to understand the theory, but typically there's somebody telling them what kind of weld to do, an engineer making all those decisions. And one of the reasons is it costs $12,000 in consumable materials to train a welder. And that's not typical in the African economy. So these companies all rely on, you know, Koreans or Filipinos to come in to staff these projects, which anyway, I could talk a long time about that subject, but I won't go there. It really gets back to the project management triangle. You know, the triangle I showed there, that you've got scope, cost, and schedule. And then aside that, you have contract terms, of course, on how changes and so on are managed. But I found where you've got to get those three fundamental pieces right. And that's, that's often the architect or engineer developing the plans and specs. Well, the one I pointed out was that risk management thing, because a lot of times things aren't addressed, the actual site situation or project conditions are not addressed in the standard documents. And I found that risk management process that this particular owner engaged was quite effective. I mean, I thought it was very good. So again, I wasn't involved at that stage because I got involved at the end of the project, I wasn't involved at the beginning. So I'd be recalling from my review of the documents, okay? So I may not be 100% accurate on that, but it was part of the bidding process in a bidding requirement that the contractor submit a risk management plan, and the owner had spelled out, what that plan should consist of. Okay. And then once the proposals were received, before awarding the work, there was one or two additional iterations of conversations with the contractor to make sure that a lot of times contractors will submit a risk management plan and it's just a bunch of boilerplate eyewash, right? This was in the process that they engaged, was to make sure that the risk management plan specifically addressed items on that project. It wasn't just a boilerplate thing that they whipped out of their word processor, you know what I mean? And then had very specific actions that they committed to take to manage those risks. And I've never seen it done. That was the only time in my career I'd ever seen that done. And I just thought, boy, if I had seen that earlier in my career, I would have used that process. I thought it was great. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
We did have one question online,
Sure.
or actually two. One was for your contact information, if you could provide it maybe in the power.
Oh, here. Yeah. So, yeah, I was going to say, I have a couple books you might have interest in. My website is MikeVelez.com. My phone number is 801-502-0951. And my email is mvallez, VALLEZ, @MikeVelez.com.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And then the other question was this. Construction lawsuits can be very expensive, protracted, and stressful for clients. What have you found successful that allow the parties to get to a resolution quicker and perhaps avoid the battling of experts and engaging in protracted litigation?
Good question. Boy, that would be the magic bullet, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That would be put everybody on a boat and tell them that with a leak in it, and tell them that the boat's going to fill up and sink in about 3 days unless they get their answer together. Yeah. What? Sorry, I don't have any magic bullets for that one.
I respect your examples, but I'm wondering if this analysis is sort of after the fact based on when a controversy arises, as opposed to what really happens in the negotiating stage. It seems to me that it's a very good strategy to have someone like you who says you should do A through B, and then there are subsections down to XXX. Is it your experience that bidders on public projects, for example, really do all of those things before? I was looking at the transmission line. I was wondering, do they really go over the proposed places for the transmission line?
Well, yeah.
Imagine that.
Well, yeah, no, as you read that clause that was in the clause says that the contractor will be presumed that they have examined all the conditions, but I don't know how that's.
Isn't that an impossible condition?
Yeah, no, yeah, it is.
It's a legal strategy.
Yeah, it's a legal strategy. Yeah, right.
Because I can't imagine how many of the people have been on top of Coon Peak before they did it.
Right. Yeah. Well, the other thing, there was a buffalo ranch that this thing went through. So if you can imagine building a power line through a buffalo ranch, that was kind of interesting too. But, you know, back to your question earlier. One of the things that I think would be, and I, when I get an opportunity. Either, as you know, there's so many things that architects and engineers can miss on the plans. And there's a guy, I forget his name now. I think he's out of South Carolina or North Carolina. And he has a plan check service. And you send him, and because, you know, he's got a group of people that this is all they do all day long. They go through the plans with a red line and they find all the change orders upfront. And the architect gets to eliminate all that stuff. And I mean, being a project manager and having to run into time and time again, where I have to write an RFI, request for information, and get an answer from the architect, and all the time consumed during the course of a project could be eliminated by spending the small fee to have the plans checked by an independent checker at the beginning of a project before commencement of the work. Would save a lot of time and money. And I just don't see very many owners taking advantage of that. You know, one example that I can think of is I mentioned Indian school that I was a program manager for that. And I represented the tribe building the school on a reservation. And we received proposals from a half a dozen architects that were school architects from Minneapolis, St. Paul. And one of them was at like 7% fee. And the rest of them were all like 4 or 5%. And we choose the ATS&R, Armstrong, Tollseth, Skold, and Rydeen out of Minneapolis had the best reputation for doing excellent drawings, but they charge more for it. And I knew that up front. But because I was aware of that, I was able to convince the tribe to pay a little 2% more for this architect. And there was one error. It was like a roof hatch. There was a detail around a roof hatch that wasn't quite right. And when that came up, boy, they all jumped on it. You know, they were like, "Oh, we don't do those mistakes," and they don't. I mean, that was about the only thing. A little detail around a roof hatch that wasn't quite right, and the rest of the plans were perfect. So yeah, you can go cheap on your designer, but you pay the price. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Okay.
thank you, Mike. All join me in thanking Mike for this presentation.